There is a question that sounds simple until you actually try to answer it. When did we stop being animals? Not in the poetic sense, not philosophically, literally. At what point in the fossil record, in the genetic record, in the archaeological record, does the thing we are looking at stop being an animal and start being something we would recognize as us? The uncomfortable answer is that there is no moment. There is no line in the rock. No single skull that sits on one side of the divide and another that sits on the other. No gene that switched on overnight and produced something new. What there is instead is a slow accumulation, a series of thresholds, each one crossed so gradually that the individuals crossing them had no idea anything had changed. And when you lay those thresholds out in order, what you get is not a single moment of becoming human. What you get is something stranger and more unsettling than that. Let's start with the thing that seems most obvious. Tools for most of the 20th century. Tool use was considered the defining line, the thing that separated us from everything else. Then Jane Goodall watched a chimpanzee strip the leaves from a twig and push it into a termite mound to extract insects. The definition collapsed overnight. We now know that crows fashion hooks from wire to retrieve food. Dolphins use sponges to protect their noses while foraging on the seafloor. Otters use rocks to crack open shells. Elephants use branches to swat flies. The animal kingdom, it turns out, is full of tool users. So the earliest stone tools, the Oldowan tools made by our ancestors around 3.3 million years ago, are no longer a clean dividing line. They required planning and skill, but they did not make us human in any exclusive sense. The line had to move, it moved to fire. Controlling fire is something no other animal does. The evidence for early fire use goes back at least a million years. Wonderwork Cave in South Africa holds the best evidence. Fire changed everything. It extended the day, it changed diet. It made cooked food possible, which changed brain size. It drove predators away and made sleep safer. It created a social space around which something new could happen. But fire alone does not make you human either. Because the critical question is not whether you can control fire, it is what you do around it. Around 300,000 years ago, something shifts in the record. Burials begin to appear. Not just abandonment of the dead, but intentional placement. Bodies positioned, objects placed alongside them. Ochre, the red iron oxide pigment that requires deliberate collection and processing, begins appearing in association with the dead. You do not bury someone with objects. If you do not believe they are going somewhere, you do not paint a body red if you do not believe the body means something after life has left it. This is not just behavior. This is belief. Belief about what happens after death requires the ability to think about a future you will not be present for. It requires theory of mind extended across time. It requires something that looks very much like a concept of self. Is that the line is belief where the animal ends and the human begins? Not quite. Because belief is also distributed across many species in simpler forms. Elephants return to the bones of their dead. They touch them, they linger, the line keeps moving. Here's a threshold that is harder to see, but maybe the most important of all. Teaching, not imitation. Every animal learns by watching others. Teaching is when an individual deliberately modifies their behavior to transfer knowledge to another who does not yet have it. When a mother slows down, simplifies a task, corrects mistakes, checks that the learner is following. Evidence of teaching in the animal kingdom exists, but is rare and limited. Meerkats teach their young to handle scorpions. Some bird species teach songs. Chimpanzees show tool use to offspring. But what early humans began doing with teaching was categorically different in scale and ambition. They began stacking knowledge, not just teaching the young what the previous generation knew, but building on it, adding to it, correcting it. Each generation inheriting the full knowledge of the last and pushing it forward. Cumulative culture, the ratchet effect. No other species does this at anything close to the same scale. A chimpanzee born today inherits exactly what chimpanzees have always inherited. Not because they are not intelligent, but because they cannot stack. Humans stack, we have always stacked. And that stacking is perhaps the clearest functional line between what we are and what everything else is. Around 100,000 years ago, something else begins appearing in the record. Ochre begins to appear in new contexts. Shell beads, pierced and strung engravings appear on pieces of ochre and bone. Not random scratches, but deliberate geometric patterns. And then, most dramatically, cave paintings. The oldest confirmed examples in Sulawesi, Indonesia, dated to at least 45,500 years ago. In Europe, Chauvet Cave holds paintings dating to around 36,000 years ago. Animals rendered with extraordinary accuracy, hand-stenciled in negative space, figures that suggest narrative, composition, intention. These are not the marks of an animal. These are the marks of something that looked at the world and felt compelled to recreate it on stone. Something that saw a bison and wanted to make a bison again. Somewhere? Permanently. Something that understood that a representation is not the same as the thing represented, but carries meaning anyway. This is symbolic thought, the ability to let one thing stand for another, the ability to create meaning outside the immediate physical world. Symbolic thought is the cognitive engine behind everything we consider distinctly human language. Mathematics, religion, law, art, money, every human institution is built on the capacity to let symbols carry meaning. When did that capacity appear? The honest answer is gradually, small steps, each one building on the last. The shell beads came before the cave paintings. The geometric engravings came before both. The ochre use came before all of it. The machinery was building, piece by piece, across hundreds of thousands of years. Here's what makes this question so hard to answer cleanly. The thresholds we have been discussing did not all appear in the same species at the same time. They appeared across different populations at different times in different places. Neanderthals Neanderthals buried their dead. They used ochre. There's contested evidence they made jewelry. Were they human? By some of these measures, yes. Homo erectus controlled fire and made hand axes, so symmetrical researchers have argued they were made partly for aesthetic reasons. Was that aesthetic sense a form of symbolic thought? Denisovans, known only from fragmentary remains and DNA, interbred with modern humans and contributed genes we still carry. Were they human? The further back you go, the more the boundaries dissolve. What we call human is not a fixed category that was invented at a specific moment. It is a direction, a trajectory, a set of capacities that accumulated gradually, unevenly across multiple related species. There is one thing that happened that feels to many researchers like the closest thing to a true threshold: language. Not communication. Every species communicates, but language. Recursive, generative, infinitely combinable. The ability to take a finite set of sounds and combine them into an infinite number of meanings. The ability to talk about things that are not present, about the past and the future, about things that do not exist at all. No other species has language in this sense. Chimpanzees trained in sign language can learn hundreds of symbols, but cannot combine them recursively to generate new meanings the way a human child does automatically by age 3. The gene most associated with language, FOXP2, underwent a critical mutation somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago. That timing overlaps with the explosion of symbolic behavior in the archaeological record. Language did not just allow humans to communicate more efficiently. Language restructured thinking itself. When you can name something, you can think about it when it is not there. When you can describe a future, you can plan for it. When you can tell a story, you can share an experience with someone who was not present for it. Language is the technology that made every other human technology possible. If there is a threshold, it is probably somewhere in the evolution of language. Not a single mutation, not a single moment, but the gradual emergence of a system. And once you can do that, nothing is the same again. So when did we stop being animals? The honest answer is we didn't. Not cleanly, not at a moment you could point to. What happened instead is that a species of animal gradually developed a set of capacities, each one building on the last, until the accumulated result was something that had no clear precedent in the history of life on Earth. We still have the hardware of animals, the instincts, the drives, the body that needs sleep and food and warmth and touch. None of that changed. What changed was the software running on top of it. A capacity for symbolic thought that let us build languages. A language that let us build cultures. A culture that let us stack knowledge across generations. And a stacked knowledge base that eventually produced everything from the wheel to the telescope, to the chip running inside the device you're using. To watch this right now, the animal is still in there. It shows up when you're afraid, when you're hungry, when you want to belong to a group and feel the particular pain of being excluded from one. But something else is in there too. Something that grew slowly over millions of years from a sharpened rock and a controlled flame in a body placed carefully in the earth. Something that at some point along the way started to wonder where it came from, and has not stopped wondering since End card.